Well, for more on the spiraling conflict, we're joined by Matthew Brodsky. He's a senior fellow at the Gold Institute for International Strategy. Good to have you with us.
Good to be with you.
So we're into day 5 of fighting now. Are we looking at war at this point?
Well, the unfortunate reality in that neighborhood is that this type of thing happens every few years. And you have the precipitating event. Obviously, Hamas, which controls Gaza, is the party that's sending rockets towards civilians in Israel. And Israel, from their perspective, is trying to create a new level of deterrence that's going to be longer lasting and to try to cut down on the capability Hamas has to launch those rockets. The unfortunate reality is that there's usually internal Palestinian issues, this time between Fatah and Hamas, that they end up turning onto Israel, and then Israel ends up having to obviously defend itself. And this is the way it goes in a rough neighborhood, unfortunately.
Right, Matthew, I mean, you did bring up, Hamas firing these ground-to-ground missiles. I mean, Israel has a pretty robust anti-missile defense system. We know of the Iron Dome. So what's the calculus of Hamas's attack here? I mean, its firepower is clearly inferior, less accurate, and as we've seen, does not inflict anywhere near the kind of damage that Israelis have. So what are they trying to achieve here?
Right, that's the excellent question. They know that they're not going to win militarily, which is, of course, their goal as a terrorist organization is to destroy Israel. But the goal is to show to the Palestinian people that they can better represent the Palestinians, that they are better at looking after Jerusalem and protecting Jerusalem, even from Gaza, which is not connected to it, compared to Fatah, which is the leadership of the Palestinian Authority, which is throughout the West Bank. And the fact is, there was supposed to be the first election in 16 years. And Mahmoud Abbas, the Palestinian Authority Prime Minister, the head of Fatah, canceled the elections that were to be in May once he saw that Hamas was going to end up winning. So at this point, Palestinians in the West Bank, the leadership, and Hamas were really angry at each other and wanted to distract attention. There are, of course, other issues, as there always are in this long simmering conflict that went into it. But that's the main thing that really brought us to where we are today. And Israel, from its perspective, has to create a deterrent effect so that the next time there's something like this within internal Palestinian politics, that Hamas doesn't think to itself, its leadership, either in Gaza or in Qatar, that's external, that they don't think to themselves, well, maybe I'll just launch hundreds of rockets at Israeli civilians and that'll regain my street credibility. So that they understand that, unfortunately, there's going to be a large price to pay. The people that lose the most is quite clearly the Palestinian people. They're being very poorly represented by these two political wings.
I mean, there was, of course, the decision to launch the rockets, but also there's the whole, I mean, there's just so many layers of conflict here, right? And there is, of course, the eviction case that some see as the powder keg and the trigger point. But apart from Palestinian politics, there's also Israeli politics. I mean, it's an interesting time. The leaders can't form a coalition government. We've had now, 4 elections in 2 years. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is standing trial and corruption charges. How do these influence the current conflict as well? I mean, do they play for or against Netanyahu?
Well, interesting. This is a point I don't think many people have quite understood yet. And of course, we'll see how it plays out. First of all, from Israel's perspective, they look at the situation and think to themselves, it would be much better to have an actual solid functioning government that lasts for a long time. Because if you're constantly in an election cycle, your eye is not on everything. But one of the more interesting aspects of this previous election is one of the Arab Israeli parties, Ram, was going to be the kingmaker, essentially, in whichever coalition was formed in Israel. Netanyahu was unable to form a coalition. He had the mandate first to do that. And the Arab party said he was not going to be with Netanyahu. The result of this, however, is that Naftali Bennett, the other political leader, and Yair Lapid, Ram, this party of Arabs, is not going to join them either. The weird, perverse logic is that Hamas may hate Netanyahu, who's been in office for a long time, but they are almost guaranteeing, and we'll see what happens, but they're guaranteeing in some form of way that his legacy and his rule there is going to endure. And at the same time, this is from Hamas what they want, because they don't want to see coexistence between an Arab party that actually came forward from Israel and said, instead of just showing solidarity with Gaza or other demands that can't be met, I want to take care of my people and be a part of the government. That's a good step that, of course, Hamas is completely against.
You know, Matthew, we really technically are out of time, but I have to squeeze this in because, you know, so many countries are appealing for the violence to stop. There's no avail. Can the regional powers do more? How do you see the US playing into this? I mean, at the same time, they're trying to send an envoy, but then stopping a UNSC meeting about what's going on. How does this current unrest come to an end?
Look, I mean, Israel is a sovereign nation. The decision making that they're thinking is they can either deter Hamas, they can deter and significantly degrade their capabilities, or they can go into Gaza and reoccupy. They're not going to do the third, the last one. They're probably doing something between the first option, between deterrence and significant degrading of their power. There's really nothing that the international community can do. The fact is, it's being attacked by missiles fired at civilians. So this is the calculation. This is what happens. Terrorists don't get to start wars and then just say, you know, I think we've had enough. Let's just stop it right now. This is Israel's response. It would be much better if there were a permanent solution. Clearly, the previous administration put one forward, and they didn't accept.
A permanent solution we can only hope will happen in our lifetimes. Matthew Brodsky, thank you very much.
Thank you.